Good afternoon. My name is Cindy Mazer, and I'm the Director for ADR, Alternative Dispute Resolution at FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency. I'm also Chair of the Conflict Management Workplace section, and that's part of the Interagency ADR Working Group. And all of those groups welcome you here this afternoon. And we just want to take a moment to thank all the people who made this possible. A lot of people work very hard to make sure that the acoustics work, that the video work, that you get through all the security upstairs. We really appreciate everybody's hands helping with all of that. So thanks for all the people at DOE and the people at FEMA, and our speaker who is also from FEMA, and people from the EEOC. So let's talk about what we're going to do next time. I'd like to start by just giving you a preview. Thursday, May 14th, we're going to have Mary Atwater speak with us about neuroeconomics and decision making, where we look at the brain and we look at how it analyzes problem solving and conflict management and decision making. So that should be very good. That's May 14th here at noon. So we'd love to see you here for that. Now, in terms of today, we've got Vik Kapoor, who's going to speak with us about positivity in the workplace and how that relates to conflict management. Let me tell you a little bit about Vik Kapoor. He's an ADR attorney at FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency. He is also an adjunct professor of ADR at Howard Law School. He is on the Executive Council of the American Bar Association section on dispute resolution. And what's most important for us here in the room is that he won the International Ombuds Association annual writing contest when he wrote a paper on this very topic, which is why we asked him to speak today, because we're very interested in his research, and we know that he's very, very attracted to this topic and really is quite the expert. I also want to tell you that at the time that he wrote this paper that won the award, he was a class action litigator in Southern California and chief legal officer of a human rights nonprofit. He has a JD from Georgetown and his undergraduate from UCLA. So with that, we'll turn things over to Vik, Positivity in the Workplace. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cindy. I appreciate it. And thank you all, and I appreciate your patience today. When Cindy was introducing me, I recalled when I was writing this paper a few months ago, maybe almost a year ago, I recall being a class action litigator and being fairly depressed at work. I spent a lot of time arguing with people, fighting over minutia of contracts, and I would come home and sort of squirrel away in my little hole and work on positivity in the workplace. And wrote this paper, and I really found such joy and solace in it. And so I was very thankful and grateful for Cindy and everybody at FEMA when they hired me, because I realized that now I could really bring that to bear in a positive way. So we are talking about positivity in workplace conflict management. And so just a quick roadmap of the presentation. I'm going to go through the roadmap very quickly and do a little housekeeping. I was going to do a reflection prompt with you all, if we could, and then talk about the positive psychology, sort of a primer of positive psychology, talk about positive conflict management, offer some resources, and some question and answer at the end. So for those of you on WebEx, if you could all feel free to write any questions you'd like to Victor and Pam, who are monitoring those, and then at the end, we'll field some of those questions if we have time. We will certainly have some time for that. And then for those of you in the audience as well, if you could, just jot down any questions you might have, and at the end we can circle up. I will have some opportunity to participate throughout, and we'll also have 2 polls. So as part of the housekeeping piece, I'd like to start off by doing one of the polls. And so I ask you to bear with me as we do this. It'll take about 2 minutes for those on WebEx to be able to engage in the poll. And then those of you in the audience, I'll actually ask it verbally and get a show of hands. So I'm going to open the poll now. It should pop up right there. And the question is, how long have you practiced ADR? The responses are either you're not an ADR practitioner, 1 to 3 years, 3 to 5 years, 5 to 10 years, or over 10 years. And so we'll just give everyone who's on the call just a minute to respond. So how about everyone in the audience as we wait? Who's been practicing for more than 10 years? Wow, most of you. Who's been practicing from 5 to 10 years? Great. 3. That's 1, that's right. 3 to 5 years? None. 1 to 3 years? 1. I'll be number 2. And then who is not an EDR practitioner? Okay, great. 2, excellent. So part of the purpose, and let me just give everybody, it's about 2 more seconds on the call here. Part of my intent in asking this question is really to get a sense, of course, of where you are coming from, but also to articulate that this presentation is, it's trying to reach a lot of different kinds of folks. And so at the end of the day, a lot of you who've practiced for more than 10 years have forgotten much more than I ever learned, right, up to this point. And so the goal is really to provide you just a couple of tidbits that you can take back to your practice. And certainly part of the challenge that I have here is to really offer something that isn't completely well known for everybody, but at the same time, those who have some experience can immediately draw the connection with their work. Okay. So we're looking at about 69 people who are not practitioners on the phone, about 50 who didn't answer, but about 20 who have over 10 years. Great. So that's a good diversity, a fair amount of people who are not practitioners. And so this is exciting for us to be able to start and talk about positivity in the workforce in this way. All right. Let's just close this out. All right. Okay, so first off, I'd like to ask you all to just reflect, if you could, on a time when positivity made or could have made a significant difference in your practice. And now, of course, for your purposes, positivity can be defined any way you like, but it could be about optimism or hope, any sort of positive emotion, positive feelings, a sense of desire, goals. So any time that you can think of where positivity made or could have made a significant difference. Now let everyone just take a minute to jot something down. And then I'd love for someone, at least a few people, to share who are in the audience, if we could. Thank you, thank you. You just press the button.
Okay. Hi, Alinda. I had the meeting. Oh, it's not on. Okay. Should I just speak? No. Okay. Hello? Okay, good. Okay, so I had a mediation between two co-workers who were really exasperated and frustrated with each other and were at the point where they really wanted to be separated, transferred to a different office just to get away from each other, and that's all they could see. It had come to my attention through interviewing them before that at one time they had been actually friends many years ago, and the things had just deteriorated. So what I asked them to do is to reflect on the time when they were friends, to go back to then, and what was it that made them friends? What was it that they liked about each other that made it possible for them to be friends then? And it was hard for them to sort through and remember, but when they did, they started recognizing some things about each other, some strengths, some positive characteristics of each other that they remembered. And I asked them to share it with each other, and they did. And it shifted the energy. It just shifted the energy in the room, just getting them in that frame of mind. So that's my story. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
Any others? Okay, great. Well, I do have a story I can share with you all. Um, so my story is, I wanted to be a brain surgeon growing up. You know, I really cared deeply about the brain, and I wanted to, you know, do it. I really cared deeply about it. So I finally convinced a surgeon, a well-known surgeon in the hospital I volunteered in, to allow me to visit him and sort of observe him, shadow him as he did open brain surgery. And I recall this time when there was a very serious operation that was going to happen. It was going to take about 8 hours, 9 hours or so. And you could tell the surgeon was visibly fretted. He was stressed. He knew that this was going to be a very difficult surgery. And so he had a practice of meeting with his patients several hours before the surgery, before they were sedated, so he could chat with them and get a sense of who they were. And I just recall the patient, looking at the doctor and seeing him all stressed and saying, Doc, can I please just say one thing to you before we go our separate ways here? And the doctor said, of course. And he said, just have fun today. And I thought, it just really struck me because I saw the doctor just visibly become less stressed. He took a deep breath. And you can't say for sure whether it made a significant difference, but for me it did. I mean, I certainly felt better about the situation. I felt more optimistic that it would go okay, and certainly it did go okay. And so, of course, there's a problem with my story, and that is it's not about ADR practice. An ADR practice or your practice isn't brain surgery. But there are a lot of parallels there, and that is that a lot of times we're going through the motions. We're doing our work on a day-to-day basis, and sometimes we forget that we're supposed to have a little bit of fun, that we're supposed to be optimistic, and that mindset can make a significant difference. And I have one more just brief story. I like to visualize how events are going to occur. And so, of course, just like every other major event in my life, this brown bag, I decided to visualize this brown bag a few days ago. And I like to visualize it being sort of a best case scenario. Sometimes, of course, it doesn't work out that way. And so I was daydreaming about this brown bag. And my daydream was that I couldn't speak straight. I was all garbled. I stood up to say hello, and I fell flat on my face. And I looked over, and Cindy started to smirk or to chuckle, right? And then everybody started to laugh. And I sat there, and everybody was laughing uproariously. And I thought, that's kind of funny in its own right. The fact that I can walk away from this presentation and have everybody have a good time as a result. I started laughing as well, and I thought, wait, is that the best case scenario or the worst case scenario? And I can't tell anymore. And so that told me that, everything's going to work out. It's going to be okay. So positivity does have a place in our practice, and that would be my assertion today for you all. And I encourage you to find little ways in which it can intrude into your practice in novel ways. Okay. All right. So the first step of the presentation is about the primer, a PP primer. Positive psychology is a scientific study of happiness and well-being. It's also the study of flourishing and the various characteristics and attributes that make for flourishing organizations and individuals. Okay. This is setting the stage, so just 4 quotes about positive psychology or psychology in general to give you a sense of the backdrop here. Sigmund Freud said, way back when, much will be gained if we transform your hysterical misery into common unhappiness. And the idea was we're just trying to get back to the average, the baseline. You have schizophrenia or depression or whatever it is, and our goal is to really just try to make you a new kind of normal. And so Marty Seligman, who's the father of positive psychology, came across, and his quote is fundamentally different, right? Psychology is much bigger than just medicine or fixing unhealthy things. It's about education, work, marriage. It's even about sports. What I want to do is see psychologists working to help people build strengths in all of these domains. And so positive psychology is really a strengths-based approach to psychology, and it's about creating meaning, looking at the bright side of things rather than just trying to look at the negative and get them back to the average. And then so Dalai Lama says the happiness is not something ready-made. It comes from your own actions. And certainly we'll discuss some more today about how being intentional in your ways can have a significant impact when it comes to positivity. And then Aristotle, sort of going back historically, happiness is the highest good in the end to which all our activities ultimately aim. Now you may disagree with some of these quotes, but fundamentally this has been around for a long time, right? There's a sense that happiness matters, that people are striving to be happy. There's a sense that happiness is to some extent within our control. And then, of course, the ideas of what psychology really means and how to approach that, and the sense that positive psychology is about looking at the upside. Okay. So Marty Seligman also came up with a model. It's called the PERMA model. It's really it spells out the ingredients of how to live a happy, flourishing life. And it comes down to positive emotion, engagement, relationships, meaning, and accomplishment. Okay. So how is that applied to the workforce? Okay. And this can be for yourself, it can be for your customers, your clients, however you want to approach it. But the PERMA in the workforce, and of course I use some creative license in plugging certain characteristics to these different ingredients, so it might be a little bit different for you. But for the P, for positive emotion, you can really recognize that happiness is in your control. Now there's a number of studies about this, and so there's a happiness formula, and there's several different formulas in fact, but most of them come out saying, although a piece of your happiness is genetic, about 40% or so is genetic, about 10 to 15% has to do with circumstance. And the rest, the remainder, is really about intent. It's your intentional actions. And so there are many ways you can go about actually becoming more happy. And later on in the presentation, I'll describe one very specific intervention that you can use that's very easy that would actually improve your positive mood immediately. Okay? And then there's this idea of the hedonic treadmill. So many people think if you win the lottery, your life's just going to be so much better, you're going to be so much happier. The idea that circumstances don't have as much of an impact really came to bear in this hedonic treadmill study. They looked at people who won the lottery, and they looked at people who recently lost the right to their limbs, so they were paraplegic. Okay? And they figured that these people would fundamentally either become much happier or much less happy and stay that way. Well, lo and behold, over time, in about 5 years, the people who won the lottery came back down to earth and were just as happy as they kind of were before. And the people who lost the rights to their limbs, all of a sudden, over time, through intent and through their own mindset, were able to become as happy or very close to as happy as they were before as well. And so that's profound, because a lot of times we're waiting around for some life event. And that life event might come, and it might not really give you the impact that you thought. And this is, for me at least, it's fundamentally important for my clients, because they're always, if that manager gets fired, or if this happens, or I get promoted, or all these different XYZ variables, if these things happen, my life will be so much better. But in reality, these studies show that that might not be the case. Okay. So for engagement, there's really this concept of flow, right? So the idea of flow is there are moments at work or at play when you completely lose track of time. You're so engrossed in the moment. And you're functioning at a very high level, but you don't really care for the time. You're not looking at the clock. You're not really even worried about your own self, really. Like you might be in a strange position, or it might be painful, or whatever it is. But because you're so in the moment, you have that flow, and that actually is one of the key ingredients to positivity and happiness. The idea that relationships are so important, they're integral in our life, right? A lot of times we forget about that when we come to work, however. And so there are a number of authors and studies about how positivity and catching people doing something right can have a significant impact on productivity. So for instance, Greenberg and Mayman came up with this study for CEOs of large Fortune 500 companies, and they found that those organizations that had the highest productivity levels were ones where managers, line managers, everybody, they were really focused on catching people doing something right. Of course, you have to, at times, point out shortcomings or ways in which you can improve performance and whatnot. And that's not the idea of just forgetting about that. But the sense is, at least in our culture, a lot of times, we spend a lot of time focusing on how we can improve or what's going wrong. And so the idea of really catching someone doing something right is so important, at least to build relationships. And then there's the idea of HERO: hope, efficacy, resilience, and optimism. This is something that I think any ADR practitioner can really apply immediately. We always have to deal with difficult conversations, or how to prep clients with dealing with difficult conversations. And there's so many roadblocks to that, right? To having that difficult conversation. Maybe the individual you're supposed to speak to is not available, they don't want to talk to you, or maybe you don't feel like you have the proper skill set to be able to have the conversation, the body language and all of that, or the belief that you can make a difference yourself. And so really imparting that information to customers, or really understanding it yourself, is so important. And the sense is that if you have the willpower and the way power, that's the hope piece. You also need efficacy, so the sense that you have the tools and the strategies available to be able to resolve the issue. And then resilience is an interesting definition of resilience is the level of connectivity that you have with a goal pathway, right? So if you have connection to a goal, you really care about a goal, but you get knocked down, are you going to get back up again? And so the more connectivity you have to that goal, the more reasons that you want to strive for that goal, the more resources you have to get to that goal, you know, the more support you have, the easier it is for you to bounce back when it's time. Okay, and then optimism, of course, as you all know it in sort of the general terms of just feeling like you can do something. But there's also a languaging piece behind optimism, and that is when something happens to you, good or bad, is it because of you and is it always that way? Or is it because of external events and is it possibly because of something else? And it is not always that way, right? So those individuals who are extremely pessimistic in general and permanently pessimistic tend to do less well, tend to be less healthy, et cetera, et cetera. But a lot of us have the ability to take control of this, to take ownership of the sense of languaging around optimism. And so Marty Seligman, back when he was a depression, psychologist, he focused on depression and sort of people giving up and things like that. When he was a researcher early on in his career, he realized that rats who are put in a situation where they can't escape tend to also not try to escape later when they're in a situation where they can escape. And those who could escape the first time tend to try very, very, very hard, even when they can't escape later. And some of them possibly can escape, even when the researchers built it in a way where they didn't think anybody could escape. Right? So the idea is you can defy odds if you believe you can, and if you tell yourself you can, and you have to really monitor what you're saying in your head and how you're expressing it also verbally. Okay, and the last piece of this, the achievement piece, is about signature strengths. Many of you probably know about Strengths Finders, Tom Rath. There's also a number of other strengths-based books and resources that have come out since Tom's book. There's Emotional Intelligence 2.0, Leadership 2.0, Entrepreneurial Strength Finder 2.0. And the idea is really to learn your strengths, to try to identify them early on, to see how they evolve over your career, and then to really use them in novel ways, and to also help your clients use them in novel ways. Okay. Okay. Bear with me 1 minute. You do manual? Oh, yeah. Back. Thanks. Thanks a lot. Okay. All right. So the next slide is it's a boat. It's a sailboat. I hope my drawing wasn't too horrible there. The idea here is that we're not Pollyannas. We're not talking about only the positive in life, right? The idea is you have to have some negative as well, otherwise it just doesn't work, right? You can't just put your head in the sand. And so the sailboat really represents sort of the continuum of emotions that would be most effective for a flourishing life, right? The idea is the bottom part, sort of the height of the boat, the base of the boat is on the water. And so you have some negativity there. You have some sense of reality there. And then the sails really lift you up and take you forward. And they're about 5 times greater in depth, in length, however you want to perceive that. The idea is, so someone came up, Lozado came up with this positivity ratio. And the sense is that if you say 5 to 1 more positive than negative words, they coded words, you have flourishing relationships. So it's 5 to 1 at work, it's something like 8 to 1 at home, right? And so a lot of us maybe came from legal background or other backgrounds that might not be as optimistic at work all the time. And so In fact, when I was a litigator, it was really a 1-to-3 ratio. We spent very little time complimenting opposing counsel and a lot of time criticizing them. And so the idea is maybe that works fine if you're an attorney doing that, but if you bring that home, you better believe you're not going to have a very good relationship at home. All right, so this boat really represents two things. It represents, one, that you have to have some negative in life because that's part of being balanced. And the second piece is that really you should have a lot more positive, and you should be intentional around that. And use words. Really think about, if you have to counsel your child because they did something bad, a lot of times just sort of try to be intentional about how you're saying it, right? Could it be reframed in a way where there's a lot more positive built in to that discussion? Okay. All right, so Shelley Gable came up with this idea of active constructive communication, okay? And so there's really, there's two brackets here. There's active, and then active versus passive, and constructive versus destructive, okay? And here, this is a fact pattern for when someone comes to you and says, I just got this promotion at work. So if you were active, you would have a lot of emotion, you'd be very energetic. If you were active and destructive, you would say, oh, that sounds like a lot of work. Are you sure you can handle it? If you're active and constructive, you'd say, that's amazing news. I know how hard you worked for that. How did it come up? How happy are you right now? Sort of relive the moment. Explain to me, where you were, what you were doing, and really congratulating that person. And of course, on the other side of things, on the passive side of things, you could have something as simple as, well, that's nice. That's passive and constructive. And a lot of times that's how we interact with the world. We're very busy, and sometimes when we hear good news for others, we may not take that moment to think through how we can really make the most meaning for them as they're sharing this news with us. And of course, it can be passive and destructive as well, where you just very much ignore the situation. I'm hungry, are you going to happy hour, etc. And so the idea is a lot of times we forget that this is important, that you're really supposed to share in the good news of others. And so this is just a gentle reminder that where it's possible, whether in our practice or whether in helping our clients or working with our colleagues, it's really helpful to build that relationship in a way where people feel good about sharing information, and they do so because you're really inquisitive, you're interested. Okay, and just a quick snapshot of additional research in the field. It's a little bit more tangential but significant. For groups, positivity reverberates at 3 degrees of separation. Think about that for a minute. So your friends are impacted by your happiness. Okay. And there's a giant heart study done in Massachusetts that showed people over 3 generations, and it was fairly conclusive that the individuals really are prominently impacted by the feelings of others. And of course, many of you might know of mirror neurons, where if you're looking at somebody, it's actually recent neuroscience research that shows that you actually are able to recognize the emotions of others because your neurons, your facial expressions at a micro level change to mimic what their emotions are. So think of it that way, as if somebody is happy and they're looking at you, your body is contorting in a way to mimic that happiness, right? And the same goes for the opposite. Pam and I were talking on the way in today. There's actually a presentation that she was looking at called Negativity in the Workplace. And so I thought that was really interesting, is they're talking about the chain of screaming and things like that. If you're unhappy, and especially if you're an ADR practitioner and you're unhappy, you're sitting in a room and you're seeing all these visitors, well, you don't mean to, but your unhappiness is being mirrored and it's going out into the world, and it's really sapping the energy from the community, from your organization, etc. So that's the 3 degrees of separation. And there's also, sort of as in keeping with that, there's upward spirals of positive momentum in organizations, right? So the broaden and build theory is just that you can actually develop and build this positive spiral. And then for individuals, those who trying to become happier, mimicking a Duquesne smile increases happiness. So a Duquesne smile is one of those really wide grin smiles. You're smiling like this, your eyes come down. Even mimicking that, if you have an intention of becoming happier as a result, the studies show that you'd become happier. And same for singing and listening to music. But again, they did a control group that didn't have the intention of becoming happier, and they didn't become happier. So you really have to have both pieces, the physical act and the mental act. Okay, so I alluded to this early on in the presentation. And this has been researched, three good things. The gratitude journal. It's been researched to be the #1 most significant, easiest, fastest, best happiness intervention out there. And it's quite simple. All you have to do is for 15 days, write down 3 things that happened well and that you are grateful for. Provide detail, including what you expected to happen, what happened, and what you're grateful for. And then savoring those moments for greatest impact. You know, savoring in general is just a great activity, and it's completely in your control. So I hope a lot of you, if you haven't already, or if you've never tried this, I really encourage you to take a couple of days, maybe try your gratitude journal, maybe recommend it to a client or two, see how they think. I use it a lot in my coaching practice. It doesn't work for everybody, certainly, and you have to be flexible around that, of course. But at the end of the day, it really can have a meaningful impact. Because we do a lot of great things and we just forget about them. We're so focused on the negative a lot of times. Okay, so the rest of the presentation is really sort of applied positivity, working on how it might impact your practice. And I'm very cognizant of the fact that a good chunk of people, at least on the phone, are not ADR practitioners. And so I'm hopeful that what we discuss here, whether it's facilitation or coaching, it has some relevance to whatever practice you have. I should take a moment now actually and introduce the second poll that I'd like to do. If I can do that. Okay. I'm not going to give it the full 5 minutes, so I'll probably cut it at like 1.5 minutes or so. So all of you who are on the phone, if you could, as quickly as possible, respond. Which of the following activities do you engage in? Mediation, facilitation, coaching, training, or none? All right, and so how about those in the audience here? How many of you participate in mediation? Either as a counsel or as a mediator? Okay, so about 10 or so. Okay, how about coaching? What's the next one? Facilitation, sorry, facilitation. About 8, okay. Coaching? 6 or so, okay. And then training. Great, so number of individuals, okay, great. And this was just so I could get a better sense of how to tailor the rest of the presentation. It looks like a pretty mixed bag, which is nice. I'm hopeful that the next couple of slides that I share will be applicable to all these different domains. However, at the end when we do the Q&A and some sharing, if you have a specific question or you want more detail on a particular thing, of course we can talk about it here or offline. But the intent was to really create a presentation that would address a number of these different areas of work. Okay, so on the poll for the WebEx, we're looking at about 10% training, about 50% coaching, 30% facilitation. Let's see. Okay, so a fairly mixed bag, I would say. Training is about okay, good. Share with. That'll pop up. There we go. So for those of you who are in the audience, if you can, for you to see that it's a fairly mixed bag, which is nice. I will get out of this. All right. All right. So for those of you who need some solid substantive research here, right? We've got a law review article for you. Arthur Perlstein wrote about a 60-page law review article, and to boil down, it says a couple of really profound things. One is there seems to be an inverse relationship between well-being and conflict. Okay, And there's also support for the idea that a positive feedback loop exists between happiness and collaboration in the conflict resolution context. Right? So the idea is the more collaborative you are, the happier you are. The happier you are, the more collaborative you are, and it goes the other way as well. And so certainly it's important, and Ken Cloak has done a lot of research on neurochemicals and things like that, bringing dogs into mediations, et cetera, to make people happier, increase positive mood, because as a result, people tend to collaborate more, they tend to come up with more creative solutions, they tend to resolve their disputes. Okay, so it's quite important in this context. Okay, so I have a hypothetical for you all, and I'm going to ask you to just take a couple of minutes. I'll read through it, and then you can please, if you could, jot down a couple of notes, and then I'm going to ask a few people to share, if that's okay. So you're serving as a mediator for an institutional client. Prior to the mediation, a party says the following to you in private: I do not want this mediation to blow up into a shouting match. I am worried that there will be a great deal of emotion. We seem to agree on 4 of the issues, but the last 2 are very tense, and I do not know if we will be able to resolve this today. How can the principles of positivity help you? Does anyone want to share?
Well, there is one commenter online said that one of the ways to approach it is to set the tone for the room.
Great.
The positivity.
Excellent. So to come to the table with an optimistic tone. Great. Yes. Oh, can you use the microphone?
Well, one of the things you can do is reframe each of the things that your client has told you. So instead of saying, I don't want it to blow up, you say, like, I'd like to have a pleasant discussion today. For the last one, they already agree on 4 of them. You can phrase it as like, wow, you already agree on most of the issues, and so there's some room to get creative with the next 2.
Great.
With respect to the great deal of emotion, is to say something like emotion is okay. It's natural, and we expect people to feel emotion, and it's great if just so long as we don't we don't have to act out the emotion to express it.
Great. Any other thoughts?
And you could ask what is the feeling around the issues that they have resolved?
Mm-hmm.
How did it feel to resolve those? And have them elaborate on that. And then also have them imagine what it would feel like to resolve the issues that they're worried about, to sort of visualize what it would feel like.
Absolutely.
I wanted to add something onto the comment about emotion, which is that if there is strong emotion, while you've got high risk, you've also got high opportunity, because if you handle it well and the people have a chance to feel it within certain parameters, then it might shift, and it might shift with a feeling of conviction for the people in the room.
Great. Any other thoughts?
Some folks on the web audience say, first have the person calm down and let them know everything will be okay.
Mm-hmm.
Another one is ask participants to think outside the box. I cannot interpret it. I don't know. Folks, just type it. And work on positive emotions.
Great. Excellent. Yeah. Thank you. So what I heard a lot of you saying. Sorry, guys. All right. So what I heard a lot of people in the audience saying was, got to keep a good humor about all this stuff, right? All right. Was to really focus on approach goals instead of avoidant goals. So an avoidant goal is what you do not want to happen. I do not want it to blow up in our face. My goal is to not be passed up for promotion next time. An approach goal is what you want to happen. My goal is to be promoted next time, or I'd like us to be able to resolve this constructively. An avoidant goal, I do not want an argument, and an approach goal, I want a healthy, civilized discussion. So simply reframing, and that's something that we have complete control over, right? We're in a position to be able to reframe whether it's a colleague that we're arguing with or a client that has a difficult situation or we're in a mediation or a facilitation and there's a lot of emotion. Whatever it is that we're doing, there's always a possibility of being able to reframe. And so whenever you hear yourself or you hear others saying something like, I do not want this to happen, you can always be proactive and try to frame it in a way of what do we want to happen? Simple as that. Okay. All right. Another thing, going back to this slide right here, one of the pieces, so we're talking about appreciative facilitation, affirmative mediation, and positive coaching, right? So the idea of really putting a positive spin on all these different practices. So for appreciative facilitation, it's about looking at strengths and really figuring out how we can move the ball in a positive manner. In affirmative mediation, it's about looking at collaboration and focusing on what's working well. And positive coaching, again, it's trying to envision or visualize, what the best could be, helping clients or whoever it is getting there through active questioning. Okay, so going back here. A lot of those things, affirmative mediation, appreciative facilitation, positive coaching, they counteract cognitive biases in different ways, right? So we have a number of cognitive biases, and for those of you who were here at the last brown bag, they were talking about unconscious bias, right? And so that's down there, micro inequities. But there's also negative attribution, where we tend to think that things are worst case scenarios, like all of you laughing at me. We have demonization. We try to blame other people. We try to make them. We try to naturally. We try to say that we're right and somebody else is incorrect. Reactive devaluation is the idea of, even if you're being conciliatory in a way, if you're trying to resolve something, if you offer something, the other individual will think it's a ploy, it's a tactic, it's self-serving, and therefore they'll reject it without even giving it careful attention. Loss aversion, the idea that we really don't want to lose something, so we'll take significant risks in order to protect what we have. Really afraid of losing. Micro inequities, again, it's the idea of under the surface, maybe even unconscious, these sense of context and where we've come from and how that impacts our belief system. And then avoidance victimization, just avoiding things, feeling victimized. And so there are a number of tools that you can draw on to help with these different cognitive biases. And one of them is microaffirmations. So Mary Rowe, who came up with micro inequities, also came up with microaffirmations. And the idea is that perhaps because of our upbringing or just our way of being, we subconsciously we might think differently of a certain group of people. And we don't even realize this. And of course, we're very cultured and civilized, but that there is this bias under the surface. Well, to address that intentionally is to constantly remind yourself, sort of on loop in your mind, that we are all equal, that we're all great, that we're all part of Mother Nature, that we're part of the same. You can just have this running litany in your head. And over time, it'll actually, it'll create space in your subconscious to rid yourself of that unconscious bias, okay? And so the sense is that, yes, you want to get to the unconscious piece of it, but you have to do it intentionally, okay? And then exploring positive imaging. So Norman Vincent Peale has this idea, or had this idea of imaging, really predicting the future through your own visualization. And the idea is you have to really visualize what's going to happen in the future, the goal that you set for yourself. Visualize yourself achieving that goal. And then thank yourself, and if you have some sort of higher authority, thank that higher authority. And this is Norman Vincent Peale saying this, and he was a big believer in God. But to really thank that a higher authority or yourself for allowing you to accomplish that goal. So it's not that, oh, thank you for setting me up so that I possibly can achieve it. Pretend like you already have it. You've already achieved it, and now you're thanking yourself for having struggled through and been able to achieve that. Right? So that sense of finality actually creates significant upward momentum for you. And there are countless stories of individuals, paupers, looking through the window, seeing the CEO of a magazine, saying, I want to be in that role, visualizing that they had that position, thanking themselves for getting that position, and 30 years later, they're editor of that newspaper, right, or that magazine, or whatever it is. And it's just so many stories like this. And so the idea is, of course, there's limitations, there's politics, there's all kinds of things in the way sometimes, but don't ever underestimate the power of positive thought. Right? And then making self-talk positive. So self-talk is both internal and external. It's what we say to ourselves when we're in the shower, sort of, under the surface, but it's also, sometimes you might catch yourself saying, wow, I did a good job, or I can't believe I did that, I messed that up, or whatever it is. We all have these underlying narratives. And so focusing on those narratives and really making them positive can go a long way in counteracting various cognitive biases. Okay. Another strategy or tool that's very helpful in this realm is appreciative inquiry. Now, in its raw form, David Cooperrider, and he's used this at the United Nations, the Global Compact, various large organizations have used this. It's a strengths-based approach to change management. Okay? And at its rawest form, it's to discover the strengths of an organization in pairs. So it's usually people from different parts of the organization, and they interview each other, and they're looking at what really is going well, what has gone well historically. And then in groups, the individuals take those stories and they dream about what could be. What is our organization at its very best? And then they take those dream statements and then they design next steps, incremental next steps on paper, and then deliver those loud and proud in a way where it's refined to be practical. All right. And I say this in this way because appreciative inquiry, although designed for change management and in the organizational context, is very helpful at an individual level as well. All right, so there's questions you can ask yourself, there's questions you can ask others, your work teams, etc., that would inherently draw on the strengths that you have as a group or as an individual in the past, what you could possibly be in the future at the very best state, and then sort of how to get there. What are the design pieces to get there, and then to really articulate. And a lot of times you'll read in these self-help books that you're supposed to write these affirmations down and speak them loudly in the morning. Well, and for better or worse, that's a piece of this too, and it's to really speak out loudly, and there's something about it resonating in your subconscious. Okay, so I have another hypothetical for you all if you're game. All right. Your job is to facilitate a group discussion over the reorganization of several work units. Several competing factions have their own idea of a new organizational chart. After some prodding, you have convinced the parties to share their proposed organizational charts. The first group presents their chart, and the members brace themselves for the anticipated flurry of criticism from competing groups. How might the principle of appreciative inquiry help you move the ball? We've got a response.
Could you start by just asking the people who were in the group that didn't develop the idea to say what they like about the other idea?
Great.
And after that, you can ask, well, you've heard what you like. How can we make it even better?
Great. Excellent. Any other thoughts? It tells me it was a softball question. Because you got it right away. But that's right. Absolutely. you can really approach this by just asking, what do you love about this organizational chart? What are the fundamental pieces of it that you just absolutely adore? And then you take those and you add them all up. And basically, this is a sort of a true hypo. I've had to deal with this myself. And you go around the room and you basically ask every group to say what they love about all the organizational charts. And you find the sort of the bare bones basic elements that everybody can agree on, and then you go from there. And it seems very obvious once you ask it in this way, but how easy is it for you to revert to this idea of just a shouting match of people saying, I hate that piece and I don't like this, and right, it could very easily devolve into something much messier than that. Yes.
There is one modification from the web audience.
Yes.
To ask one thing that they like about the chart.
Oh, okay, great.
Because, starting small.
Yes.
Because they may have a hard time identifying more than one item.
That's fantastic. That's a good editorial, yeah. Any other thoughts? Yes, David.
Are you implying that you never expose the negatives?
No, you certainly have to get to them eventually. It really depends on the situation, and I think a piece of it is just having situational awareness around what would be most helpful. And in this particular circumstance, I knew that the vast majority of commentary would be negative in various ways. And so the idea of finding the commonality and building from that was really helpful. Certainly at times you have to focus on the negative, but we would just encourage that you try to find the positive elements first, and then that way you have some sort of common ground.
Question from the audience. Have you not set up the process in a competitive manner to begin with? In a situation potentially fraught with risk and that may invoke fear in participants about their own jobs, why are you setting people into potentially competitive groups?
So I didn't catch the first part of the question.
Have you not set up the process in a competitive manner to begin with by having them divided into different groups?
Right. Now, certainly, you could definitely approach. That's great. That's a great point. You can approach the process entirely differently and create it where everybody is in one group per se, or perhaps you divide the groups up differently so that there's different interests in mind. But assuming that you have different branches or sections or whatever it is in an organization who have their own ideas, and they've perhaps met behind closed doors on their ideas, and now they've come together. That was the intention of the hypo. But that's a very good point.
Yes, I work for an agency that has a lot of analysts in it, and I find this approach tends to favor people with maybe more nurturing personality type. So how would you go about convincing analysts to adopt this?
That's a great question. So Mary Rowe, actually, when she wrote that article about microaffirmations and microinequity, she was talking about an individual who was very analytical in nature, and over time had come to realize that this individual could get promoted just by being very analytical and not caring about the emotional piece of things. But eventually, you know about the Peter principle of you get promoted up into the point where you become incompetent. And so this individual had reached a point where they were managing so many people that having this very analytical, non-emotional perspective wasn't really creating the productivity that they needed. And so the idea is a lot of it, it's like inception. You have to come up with the idea yourself. And so we can encourage and we can provide statistics and studies and whatnot to show that it's a whole picture. It's bigger than just the cerebral part of your brain. However, at the end of the day, individuals have to choose. They have to choose that they want to embrace this because they can see the value add to their community. Yes.
I just wanted to follow up on the comment about surfacing negativity, and I found that oftentimes when I'm working with groups that have some dysfunction going on with them, that there are ways to work with them to surface the negatives more as positives instead of asking people to say, what is it that you don't like, and have people just vent about, I hate when you put a Post-it note on my computer. Talk about what is it that you'd like to see instead of getting into all the negatives. Just talk about what I would like is to have someone come up to me and tell me this in person. What I would like is when this happens, just take whatever the negative is. Almost any negative can be flipped into a positive ask. And so I'll ask groups to focus on that. And in that way they can bring forward the things that aren't working for them, but they can bring them forward in a way that it's easier for the other party to hear, because it's not heard as a criticism, it's heard as a positive ask. And that often works very well.
Yeah, that's great. And that takes a lot of skill, right? It's very easy for us to devolve into this sort of negative mindset, and it's very easy for us to articulate what we don't like about something. And certainly it's much more difficult to take the time to experience at an emotional level some negativity in your mind, or it could be an amygdala hijack. You know, part of you is very emotionally involved in the situation, and to take that moment to really rationalize it and then to flip it into a positive ask. It takes some intention. Any other thought? Yes.
Somebody else suggests to set some ground rules, one of which could be that any criticism must be accompanied by a suggestion for improvement or alternative solution.
That's great. Absolutely. Right. You always run the risk when you do love sandwiches, and that's what I call them, when you're doing a little bit of positive, a little bit of negative, that you run the risk of people discounting the positive and just focusing on the negative, right? So and that's why at times appreciative inquiry is so much more helpful, because the negative piece never comes into the equation at all. I mean, there's another time and place for that. Here, we're here to just collaborate. We're working on something positive. Let's dream, let's design, let's develop. And in the process, a lot of the sort of negative bits and pieces disappear because you're so galvanized behind a common mission of the future. And there's so many studies, there are so many reports by David Cooper Ryder of thousands and thousands of people. You know, you have the classic organization, you have people in the back of the room who are totally disinterested, they're reading the newspaper, they're trying to chime in just to derail the process. And at the end, they're up there as well with everybody else fighting to create something better for the organization and invested. They're investing themselves as well. And that's how you get the most productivity, the best outcome, because everybody's hand touches the ball, so to speak. That is certainly an option too. Some you have to play it by ear. Some groups, certainly if it's a very tense situation, they don't want to hear just positive things, right? And that's the piece that I mentioned about the boat early on, the sailboat, is like we can't live in a world where, and I'm not advocating that everyone just be Pollyanna and be positive all day long, because it's not going to serve the proper purpose of the organization or yourselves or clients or anything. But the idea is to really understand what has to be articulated as a positive thought and what has to be articulated as a negative thought. And I venture to guess, and as you're thinking over it more, you'll realize that a lot of things can be flipped to be positive in nature. Any other thoughts on the WebEx or anything? Nothing so far. Okay. And another piece of this is just positive questioning, right? So we always have to ask questions. We're always asking questions of ourselves, of others. And this is something that, at least when I was mediating cases a while ago and litigating, we rarely ever asked this question of what's going well so far. It was always a question of, oh God, the numbers are so far apart, or that argument stinks, or whatever you want to have to say about various positions and claims. And so it's rarely, well, what have we done what have we done well so far in our relationship? How is everyone interacting? What's good with the judge? What's good with the nature of the settlement so far? So that's just a very easy ask. And then also, I hear you saying that you want things to be better. What are some possibilities? If someone walks into your office and says, oh my God, I hate so-and-so, I really need to quit, or time to retire, how often would you turn around and say, well, I hear you saying that you want things to be better. What are some possibilities? But yeah, you'd be surprised if you did say that, what kind of response you might get. It really does force people to stop in their tracks and say, is that what I'm saying? Yeah, it kind of is what I'm saying. And I really do want things to be better. I'm just very fed up at one specific individual or a specific cause of action or whatever it is, right? So really thinking about possibility in that way, an opportunity, it really makes a big difference. And then this last piece is the miracle question, something that some of you might be familiar with. I really love this question. Some people don't like it as much, but I think it's fantastic. I hear some chuckles of people who don't like it in the audience, but I'll let that go. It's the idea of, all right, imagine the issue that you really were worried about, this interpersonal conflict, this issue of, your perception of being discriminated against, whatever it is, any issue that you have. Visualize that it was resolved in the middle of the night while you slept, but nobody told you. So you woke up the next morning and you're ready to go to work and you're thinking business as usual, and what is the first indication for you that something has changed? Because in fact, the solution occurred while you were sleeping. right? So the problem doesn't exist anymore. How are you going to experience that the problem no longer exists? Is it an interaction? Is it body language? Is it, you know, a feeling? And then to just spell that out, tease it out throughout the entire day, has profound implications, right? Because first of all, it forces individuals to think about, well, what is the problem and what is the solution, and how would I feel differently, and how much of that feeling is in my control? Because that's really one of the fundamental pieces of this, is that a lot of times we have a lot more control over a situation than we think we do. At least the way we operate in that context, right? So we have our own emotional baggage, we have our own perceptions of things, and so sometimes we don't give other people the benefit of the doubt because we're so embroiled in a conflict or a situation. And so the idea of really just thinking that through a little bit tends to help various customers. Okay. All right, so here's just a summary slide, and I can give you a little bit more detail. So David Cooper Ryder did come up with the concept of appreciative inquiry, as I had discussed, and I like to frame it as appreciative facilitation because you can use it in a lot of different contexts. Okay, the idea of really, whenever you're bringing people together, is always an opportunity to talk about strengths and what's going well and how we can catapult forward those strengths in a way where we can really design a new relationship together. And then Trip Bartel talks in great detail about affirmative mediation. And what he says is, you know, a lot of times, and this is something that is fairly basic in terms of basic training in mediation, is that it should be collaborative, right? You should try to be transformative in nature. It's not just resolving a dispute, it's resolving a relationship in many ways. But even that piece of the resolution piece is really just implying, like I had said earlier, the positive psychology versus traditional psychology. When you're looking at dispute resolution through a problem-solving approach, what you're really trying to do is get back to the status quo. You're taking something that's turned into something negative and you're bringing it back to average. But the idea of affirmative mediation is, well, forget all of that. Let's work on something completely new and different. Let's work on something transformative and positive in nature, and it's quite possible to do that if you have the right parties and it's the right circumstance and there's a long-term relationship involved. As Inga had mentioned, you were talking earlier about a case study that you had with individuals who a long time ago were good friends. Those kinds of scenarios are perfect for affirmative mediation because it's more than just the dollar value. It's more than just the type of the release or the legal language involved or any of that. So there's a great opportunity there as practitioners, as participants in mediation, etc., to really draw on these concepts of positivity and propel you forward in new ways, right? So just being really creative around that. And then positive coaching. So Robert Biswas Diner, he is the Indiana Jones of positive psychology. Spends a lot of time in indigenous areas around the world, Papua New Guinea and Samoa, etc. And over time, he's learned that everybody's coaching each other, right? We're all coaching ourselves. We're coaching each other in different ways. Sometimes we're more directive in our ways. We tend to mentor or tell each other what to do, but sometimes we're really asking good questions because we don't know the answer ourselves. And he realized that there's just a whole skill set around positive coaching, right? You can do it at any level. Elders do it in communities, and family members do it. So the sense of just really drawing on positive questions, working on looking at what's working well, understanding the sort of power relationships and dynamics and really trying to level the playing field there. But it's really about just creating the space, right? Creating the space for opportunity, for optimism, for hope. And it can go a long way. So he's worked with indigenous tribes that were warring with each other for years, and et cetera. And it's surprising how just a couple of conversations, a couple of questions can really make a profound difference in all of that. Okay. So there are a number of resources out there on positivity and positive psychology, and this is just the tip of the iceberg here. There's so many more. David looks like he has a question.
Yes, on your last point, I'm trying to envision an outsider from a different culture coming to meet with two warring tribes and probably having no feel whatsoever for what's really going on in each of these warring tribes or what the battle is all about. How does the outsider come to influence any of this? How does the outsider come to be accepted and respected for any of these things you're talking about?
I think that's a fair question, and it raises a very important point that I probably glossed over here, and that is that a lot of times this is more nuanced than the average ADR practice, right? So when you're doing this, it's not just that you meet a client for the first time and you hop into what's positive or what's working well. Sometimes they really need to vent or need to express that things are a little bit unsettling. It's about once you build a relationship with somebody and you feel like you're, that you have this trusted advisor relationship with an individual. And so to go back to your question, he certainly didn't do this in a day, right? Rome wasn't built in a day. He would spend months with the groups. He would have a fundamental understanding of what's going on. And the idea is to really get buy-in from them that you're almost an insider. Not necessarily an insider, but that you're a trusted advisor. And only then can you really draw on all these, positivity principles at their full function to be able to resolve conflict or create transformative relationships. It doesn't happen overnight.
There's a question. What's Biswa's Diener first name?
Roger.
Thank you.
Robert. Sorry. Okay, so there are a lot of resources out there, and I encourage you all to poke around. And if you have a particular question, if you're looking for a resource, feel free to ping me, certainly. So Authentic Happiness is one of the first ones. Several self-assessments are on there. You can Google it very easily. Marty Seligman at UPenn runs it. It's got the VIA character strengths assessment. It's got a number of other strengths-based approaches on there. A lot of the work they do is focused on research, so you can be involved. You can actually be a participant in a number of studies by filling out questionnaires and getting your own reading. You're also advancing the field. Okay. The Center for Positive Organizations is run by University of Michigan. It's, again, a phenomenal resource. These are the short list as far as I'm concerned, and so that's why I'm spending just a minute or two explaining some of them to you. So the Center for Positive Organizations has a number of resources on how to really improve the flourishing in organizations. And I believe whatever practice you actually engage in, I believe at some level you're dealing with organizations, and they could always benefit from a little bit of positivity, right? So you feel free to look at that site and get a sense of how positive organizational behavior is becoming more and more mainstream out there. And then the International Positive Psychology Association has a number of conferences. They're like the professional organization for the field. And they have a biannual meeting, which is great. And then there's a couple of blogs, one of them being the Pursuit of Happiness blog, which is just great. Lots of empirical studies and summaries, a number of studies that I didn't insert in my presentation, but there are just so many out there. And I should say a little bit about that. I was talking about the positivity ratio earlier. I was talking about upward spirals of momentum, etc. You don't have to buy into everything 100% to believe that at least it makes a difference, right? So some like Losado came up with this idea that you need 8-to-1 positive to negative words in order to have a flourishing relationship at home. Now, I run into some resistance when I present that, and I understand that resistance, right? Are you going to sit there and count your words, and how precise is it? And they use some sort of thermal fluid dynamics model to get there, and right? So you have to pick and choose what you like, but at the end of the day, it's pretty self-evident that if you're positive at home, you're going to have a better relationship at home, right? So that's a takeaway, I think, at some level. Some positive psychology is about using statistics and research and double-blind studies and all this, and I really appreciate that piece of it because it's not just hippie science, as some people like to call it, right? It's something more than that. But at the same time, sometimes researchers and scientists get lost in their own data, and so you have to pick and choose what you like. And understand that there will be more studies coming out down the road that may contradict it, that may supplement it, support it, etc. And that's how science works. It's always been that way. All right, so some books. So Christopher Peterson passed away recently, unfortunately. He was definitely a large figure in the field. He has a primer on positive psych, which I recommend. It's not very long or onerous in any way. Marty Seligman, great books. His most recent one is Flourish, and then I mentioned some of the others, Profit from the Positive. Leo Borman's book is really great. He has about 150 happiness professors from around the world writing, basically distilling all their research into, I think it's 700 words. And so that was a big challenge for most of them, right? Because 15, 20, 30 years of practice boiled down to 700 words, you can imagine. But they came out to be a beautiful book, lots of great illustrations, lots of nice quotables. So I recommend it. It's a good sort of desk dictionary almost, if you will. And then Sailaneja is actually a high school senior. He wrote a book on happyology, which I thought was very interesting. It's a different perspective. Right? Okay. So that's all I have. I hope that you appreciate it, enjoyed it. Are there any questions, thoughts, comments? I know we interspersed a couple along the way.
So I have a question. At
Sure.
one point, maybe someone from the telephone audience, said something about setting the tone. So what kind of advice would you have for us as we embark on facilitating maybe a difficult group? How do we set the tone in a way that will create a positive atmosphere? Do you have some ideas for us?
Sure, absolutely. So I think first and foremost, it's if you have any sort of prior planning meeting, to talk about your style. What is your way of facilitating, right? So to the extent, first off, it's just to get yourself in that mindset, right? So to set the tone for yourself, that this might be very heated, it might be very difficult, but I'm coming into this with a specific perspective that my goal is to make this environment positive for people, to create space for all the opinions to be heard, and for me to really try to minimize any sort of backlash as a result. And to the extent you're meeting with individuals in advance, to articulate that piece to them. That I understand you're coming in, it's going to be very emotional, it's going to be very heated, you have a lot of conflict going on and you're concerned about that. I hope that you'll respect the process and understand that it might be a little bit different from what you expected. And get their buy-in, of course. That, I'd like to approach it this way, where it's going to be more positive, and as a result, the negative elements will kind of dissipate on their own. And are you on board with that? Is that okay? Now, of course, when I'm saying all of this, I realize that at times you just can't do that, and that sometimes you have to really, you have to play the cards you're dealt with, and sometimes people are not going to give you the buy-in that you need. Right? But to really stabilize and sort of set yourself up for success in a way where you feel, where I can, I'm going to insert little tidbits of positivity. And I think that can go a long way.
There is a question on slide 16 where you talk about micro inequities and micro affirmations. Is this a book, or is micro inequities a book, or is it connected to micro affirmations?
It's an article. Micro affirmations and micro inequities is an article by Mary Rowe.
So it's the same article,
Same
dealing
article.
with both micro inequities
That's right.
and micro affirmations.
Right.
Thank
And that was the micro inequities piece was raised by Lester and Skip, I guess, 2 months ago in their unconscious bias presentation here, or maybe a month ago, whatever it was. But it's a great article, perhaps difficult to find, so I can potentially email it out to Victor, and if you want to pass it along, you can do that.
I just want to say something a little further about what Cindy's question, and then what you said about the importance of yourself, how you come into the space of whatever work you're doing. And so from my coaching training with accomplishment coaching, one of the practices they shared with us is to do a clearing before you go into your coaching every time. So you check in with yourself, and so that you notice and recognize any negativity that you have, and you go through a process of clearing it so that you're not either subconsciously or consciously bringing that into the space. So I think I wanted to just commend what you're saying about, I think one of the most important things that we can do of bringing positivity is to make sure that we are totally in that place before we partake in whatever activity we're doing.
Absolutely, yeah, that's a great point. And some people like to journal, or just sort of create mind space for yourself. Certainly that helps as a practitioner.
Do we have one last question? All right, well, I want to say thank you very much. That was great. That was profound.
Thank you.
And we are going to savor it. So thank you.